and the Earth is getting hotter. Crazy. Yes.
Global warming is something that's been happening to our planet for a little while, and it's the fact that our global average temperature has been slowly going up.
I think it's a little late. I mean, if a lot of people do something very little, I guess we could have a little chance, but at this point, there's not much hope.
We would have to go like really extreme into stopping like carbonating the air, and we would have to like stop eating beef in general, like cut down those emissions as well.
So become vegan.
It would be extremely hard and too difficult. So I don't think realistically we can fix what we've already done.
So by we, I think you're talking about the human race, because this is a global problem. It's a tragedy of the commons problem, because no country owns our atmosphere, and that's where the global warming is taking place. So several different world leaders have tried to get the world to come together to come up with agreements on things that need to be done to slow global warming, and actions have been taken, but not enough. If we don't drastically change some of our consumption patterns, then I think we're going to see the predictions people have talked about with sea level change. And you're going to find some areas that maybe farming's great, but it won't be great anymore, and other places where you never farmed that all of a sudden they're great for farming. So you're getting changes in climate in different places all over the world. That heat changes the currents that transfer heat all around the oceans. So it's not too late. I don't want to be the sky is falling, but we need to do a better job now, today, everybody.
Global warming is defined as a consistent rise in the Earth's average temperature. Global warming is not the same thing as, and in fact contributes to, climate change, the change that occurs in the Earth's average weather over an extended period of time. Since the last ice age, Earth's average temperature has been increasing very slowly. Over the last several thousand years, it's only risen by about 2 degrees Fahrenheit, but that's changed over the last century or so. During the Industrial Revolution of the early 1800s, humans started to burn large amounts of fossil fuels like coal and oil to power factories and mills. Ever since, we've used enormous amounts of fossil fuels to do things like make electricity and provide energy for transportation. Combustion, or burning, of these fossil fuels releases carbon dioxide into the Earth's atmosphere. Our fossil fuel use has increased the percentage of carbon dioxide in Earth's atmosphere enough that it functions as a greenhouse gas. Greenhouse gases act like glass in a greenhouse by trapping heat below the atmosphere. In just 100 years, the average global temperature has risen by about 1.3 degrees Fahrenheit. This warming has drastically affected the Earth. Glaciers and large areas of sea ice have begun to melt. Rising ocean temperatures have caused some sea life to search for cooler waters and has decreased the population of others. Scientists also note an increase in the number and intensity of hurricanes and tornadoes.
One worst-case prediction sees 1 billion people affected by the year 2050. Drought and famine are forecasted, along with more frequent and destructive storms.
Imagine you have a story that your grandfather told you about, the town flooding, but it was back 80 years ago. Well, imagine that happening every year.
Scientists say the world is in a race against time to combat climate change, but hope the new findings will lead to action. Gwen Baumgartner, CBS News, London.
CBS News climate and weather contributor Jeff Baradelli joins me now. Jeff, what stood out to you in this report?
So I've read a bunch of these IPCC reports. They are dense, they're technical, they're sometimes difficult to read, and they're normally very conservative. They are not very assertive typically. They want to dot all their I's, cross all their T's before they make any assertions in the reports. This one's a lot more bold. It's a lot more assertive as they become more confident in the science. And so they're using words like unprecedented, irreversible, things that they might have left out a few years ago for diplomatic reasons are not left out this year. It's starting to get to the point where, the reports are catching up with the science, which is, oftentimes the science will establish something, the IPCC will be slow to adopt it, not slow to adopt it this time around. They are very assertive in saying that humans are causing irreversible changes to this Earth.
What do the scientists mean when they say the Earth's oceans have absorbed the rising temperatures we've seen?
Right, so greenhouse gases trap heat in. And the more carbon dioxide and more methane we release through the burning of fossil fuels, the more heat that's trapped in. Some of it gets absorbed by land, but 93% of it gets absorbed by the ocean. Why that's important is the ocean is huge, it's tremendous, and it controls the climate all over the Earth, and it comes back to haunt us. If you're absorbing all that heat, and take a look at that. Every single year, ocean heat content hits new records. And actually, the amount of ocean heat content that we have absorbed in the past 50 years, we're going to see 5 to 7 times that likely by the end of the century. And what does it do? It powers much stronger hurricanes. It causes heavier rains, more extreme weather, and also kills a lot of creatures in the sea. Coral reefs are in danger of being almost completely wiped out by the middle or late part of the century. Kelp forests are going to suffer, and they actually store a lot of carbon dioxide. We need kelp forests. Grass, ocean grass, that's also disappearing. Wetlands, 50% of them, we lost about that much over the past several decades. The point is, there are cascading impacts. You cannot kill coral and not expect it to reverberate through the food web. 25% of the ocean creatures at one point in their life depend upon the coral reefs. If the coral reefs are gone, where do they go? And then what happens to us as a consequence and the rest of the species as a consequence? Every action has an equal and opposite reaction.
This all sounds very frightening, truthfully. The report also discusses a relatively new phenomenon of marine heat waves in the oceans. Yeah. Could you explain that to us?
Right. So, marine heat waves have likely always occurred, but they've occurred naturally. 90% of the marine heat waves over the past couple of decades are now attributable to humans, attributable to human-caused climate change. So that's a tremendous amount. And they're expecting that by the end of the century, we could see them increase by 25-fold, so a 25 times increase in the amount of marine heat waves are possible by the end of the century, especially in a high emissions scenario. When I say a high emissions scenario, I mean business as usual. We keep burning lots of fossil fuels. And so the bottom line is most of the heat waves in the ocean are being caused by us now, and we're going to see them increase by 25 times. So basically all the coral is going to die if we don't do something to reel in all the fossil fuels that we're burning and all the greenhouse gases that we're releasing into the atmosphere.
You've touched on this, but what are some of the projected changes and risks? And I was asking you just before we were on camera here, what does it mean for people on the coastlines here?
So we're likely to see, they quantify the increase in sea level to be somewhere between 2.5 and 3 feet likely by the end of the century. NOAA has said it could be as high as 6 feet. And a lot of that depends upon if we see large chunks of Greenland fall into the sea. Those are things that we cannot predict. But judging by the amount of warming without any large chunks of Greenland or large chunks of Antarctica falling into the sea, 3 feet of sea level rise, that will affect about 1 billion people, if not more, because most folks live in cities and most folks live right by the coastline. So low-lying cities, especially Pacific Islands, will actually probably disappear. Those people will have to be relocated, and a lot of people who live in low-lying areas in Asia and Africa and even here in the United States will have to migrate and move to other areas. In the Arctic, we've lost 50% of the Arctic ice in the last 50 years, or actually 40 years. 50% in the last 40 years. Tremendous loss. It is likely, and first of all, it's unprecedented, at least in the last 1,000 years. That's what it says in this IPCC report. Likely many tens of thousands of years. It's actually, I should say, at least since the last ice age. So the last 1,000 years or so, we've seen unprecedented levels of sea ice in the Arctic. So there's just a lot of cascade effects, too. And by the way, one more thing that they mentioned that I hadn't seen them mention before, but it has been in the science for a couple of years, that when you really warm the Arctic and you demolish sea ice because of the warmer air, it causes the jet stream to do really funky things. And so we often will talk about it here in the United States during the winter, where this wavy jet stream is causing the jet stream to maybe be more wavy. Well, this report actually talks about the fact that it's causing perturbations or changes in the jet streams and changes in the storm tracks, and that has effects right here in the United States.
Jeff, thank you for breaking it all down for us in a way that we can understand.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, Josh, go ahead. Josh.
Mr. President, there was a significant talk at the summit about climate change. I know in the past you've harbored some skepticism of science and climate change. What do you think the world should be doing about climate change, and do you still harbor that skepticism?
LNG is being sought after all over Europe and all over the world, and we have more of it than anybody else. And I'm not going to lose that wealth. I'm not going to lose it on dreams, on windmills, which, frankly, aren't working too well. I'm not going to lose it. So, Josh, in a nutshell, I want the cleanest water on Earth. I want the cleanest air on Earth. And that's what we're doing. And I'm an environmentalist. A lot of people don't understand that. I have done more environmental impact statements probably than anybody that's, I guess I can say definitely, because I've done many, many, many of them, more than anybody that's ever been president or vice president or anything even close to president. And I think I know more about the environment than most people. I want clean air. I want clean water. I want a wealthy country. I want a spectacular country with jobs, with pensions, with so many things. And that's what we're getting. So I want to be very careful. At the same time, you weren't called. At the same time, it's very important to me, we have to maintain this incredible place that we've all built. We've become a much richer country, and that's a good thing, not a bad thing, because that great wealth allows us to take care of people. We can take care of people that we couldn't have taken care of in the past because of the great wealth. We can't let that wealth be taken away. Clean air, clean water. Thank you very much, everybody. I appreciate it. Thank you.
So, you don't believe in global warming. Why is that?
Well, I believe that the Earth goes in cycles because there were many years before us that were overheated or way too cold in some areas, but then it went back to a cycle.
Do you think people influenced you as to believe in what you do?
You know, because I went through the research myself to find out the answers.
May I ask what websites you looked on or books you read?
I don't really remember, but definitely if you look at past weather graphs, you can definitely see that there's a pattern.
Do you think renewable energy should be like a thing of the past, or should we just keep doing what we're doing because we're not really infecting the environment?
What do you mean by renewable energy? Like windmills?
Like windmills, solar panels, that kind of stuff?
I mean, every power unit has its ups and downs, but it definitely works for us, and it's not doing any harm to global warming. The environment is a different story, but it's not doing anything for global warming.
Do you think the political spectrum side that you might be on might affect how you view global warming?
I don't really identify with the political side because both have their things I agree with and things I don't agree with. But I definitely believe that it's not a real thing. People just want to get us. I definitely feel, since I'm from the Midwest and our income basically comes from farmers and meat production, this is a totally different viewpoint other than where in California you don't naturally see that more often.
Money, 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 money. People deny it because to accept it would mean that then you would have to change your practices, and changing those practices would cost your business money. And so if we look at our current president, who has denied global warming forever, it's because he's got big businesses, big oil companies, gas companies funding him. And if we agree that global warming is happening and it is because of us, we need to greatly decrease our use of fossil fuels, and that's going to seriously hurt some people's pocket money, money in their pockets. I think also you have a second wave of people who deny it because, and I just hate to say this, but my parents are in that group that just follow the lead of who they believe are our leaders of the country. So if you follow Trump and you don't really follow science much, and he says there's no global warming, they're going to believe there's no global warming. But again, the biggest reason is at the end of the day, it's going to affect some big businesses and how much money they make. Another reason people deny global warming is because there really hasn't been, until recently, solid evidence that we are responsible. We, the human race, are responsible for global warming. And there is evidence now that clearly shows we're the ones that are causing it.
So it's not like a Earth natural cycle kind of thing?
No, there's these things called Milankovitch cycles that the Earth goes through periods of warm for hundreds of years, and then more like an ice age, kind of like Game of Thrones, winter's coming. But it's not this huge variation. And if we look at those cycles as of, maybe, I don't know, it was 10 years ago, all of a sudden the temperature went way up and it hasn't changed. And the research that's been done has shown that it is greenhouse gases that is causing this change, because greenhouse gases trap more heat in our planet. And they can look at those greenhouse gases, and literally they all have signatures of where they came from. And so they can look at the greenhouse gases, and they're able to see that those greenhouse gases came from fossil fuels that have been combusted. Well, the only way fossil fuel could be combusted is if we pull it out of the ground and burn it. So again, it's very clear now that we as humans are responsible for those greenhouse gases, which are causing the global warming. Two easy things everybody can do is to drive less, burn less fossil fuel. That's driving. Again, most of the viewers are high school kids, and so most of you don't drive, but you can tell your parents you don't need to ride to school, you can walk, you can ride a bike. And when you are old enough to get a car, you can make sure you get a hybrid or a complete electrical car. So reduce your individual carbon dioxide, fossil fuel consumption, and then eat less meat. Those are the two big ones.
Calico. Our response to climate change today will determine the world we live in tomorrow, and will shape the health of children across the globe at every stage of their lives. The Lancet Countdown, tracking progress on health and climate change, monitors our choices, demonstrating what action, or the failure to act, means for human health. There are many paths we can take, from a world of extremes and uncertainty, where a child has to fight simply to survive, to an environment that creates the conditions that allows them to thrive. If we continue down our current path, a child born today will live through a world that is over 4 degrees warmer, with a changing environment threatening the food they eat, the air they breathe, and the communities they grow up in. Air pollution, already dangerously high in more than 90% of cities, will worsen and further damage their hearts and lungs from the moment they take their first breath. As they grow, food insecurity will rise, with children among the worst affected by the malnutrition and stunting that comes from crop failure in a more volatile climate. Throughout their adult lives, they will experience more heat waves, stronger storms, the spread of infectious disease, and see climate change intensify mass migration, extreme poverty, and mental illness. But the future doesn't have to look this way. A global response that limits temperature rise to well below 2 degrees will transform the life of a child born today for the better. Children in the UK will see an end to coal by their 6th birthday, and the growth of solar and wind energy, resulting in cleaner air across the country. In France, the last petrol car will be sold by the time they turn 21, with cycleways and green spaces supporting safer and more livable cities. And they will celebrate their 31st birthday as the world finally reaches net zero emissions, securing a healthier future for coming generations. Which of these two pathways the world travels down will depend on the decisions of individuals, businesses, and governments. And only an ambitious response can ensure that the health of a child born today isn't defined by a changing climate.